Hey everyone, in this video I'm gonna go over Arcanist skills that can be useful for tanking and share my first impressions. I've already played it a bit in the new trial, Sanity's Edge, which you could have seen in my previous video. Let's go over all the skills one by one, starting with the Soldier of Apocrypha skill line. First we have Runic Jolt, which is the first taunting class ability in the game. It costs magicka, applies taunt and minor maim for 15 seconds, generates cracks, and also it reduces your damage taken by 2% for each cracks you have active. It has a 50 meter range, but don't worry, it is not a projectile, so it most likely cannot disappear in the air the way Destructive Clench or Inner Fire can. At least I didn't have that happen to me yet. I'd say minor maim can be mostly ignored, as there are tons of other sources of that debuff in the game. It's very prevalent. How does it compare to other taunts that are in the game? Well, it has a 50 meter range, so I cannot compare it with Destructive Clench or Inner Fire, as you will have to bring a truly ranged 28 meter taunt such as one of these two anyway. I can however compare it with Pierce Armor, but before I do that, let's look at the morphs. We have Runic Embrace, which heals you for 10.33% of your max health whenever this skill is used, and also applies minor lifesteal, which is rather useless since you'll have that from Overflowing Altar anyway. And we have Runic Sunder, which turns it into a stamina ability and causes it to steal 2200 armor from your enemy when used. This is a decent amount of armor and penetration, so this is obviously the better morph. Now let's compare it with Pierce Armor. The upsides are: you generate cracks, which you will need to empower your other abilities. You gain up to 6% damage reduction based on the cracks you're holding onto. You apply 2200 unique penetration debuff. You gain 2200 armor that's easy to keep up. It has 8 meters longer range. And it grants you 129 stamina, magicka and health recovery, because it triggers the Wellspring of the Abyss passive. The downsides are: you don't apply Major Breach. It's easy to cover that debuff in a different way, but you gotta be aware of it, because missing out on Major Breach will be a massive DPS loss. You don't apply Minor Breach. It used to be a quite unique debuff with very few sources, but recently Zo started adding more. It gets applied by, for example, Elemental Blockade when the target is chilled. It also gets applied by your other skill, Fate Woven Armor, but I wouldn't consider that to be reliable. Some adds tend to get stuck in animations, and it isn't guaranteed they'll attack you once every 6 seconds, but it can be enough in certain encounters where they don't get stuck like that. You can't utilize Master's Sword and Board. I always say that you shouldn't rely on armor from Puncturing Remedy, but it's still a great item set to use for the healing it provides. While using Runic Sunder, you won't be able to utilize it anymore, but it's not that bad. Instead of it, you can use for example the Trainee set, and you'll gain 1.3k max health and max magicka on your front bar. I think Runic Sunder is much better than Pierce Armor. I feel like the only situation where you'd want Pierce Armor over Runic Sunder is if you absolutely cannot fit in any skill that would apply Major Breach, such as Elemental Susceptibility or Caltrops, and neither can none of your teammates, which sounds like a hypothetical scenario that will literally never happen. Major Breach simply has so many different sources. Next up we have Runespite Ward. It gives you a damage shield equal to 30% of your max health. When you take damage for the first time after casting it, you deal damage to the attacker that scales with your armor. When used, you consume all your cracks and heal for 10% of your max HP for each cracks consumed. The first morph is Spiteward of the Lucid Mind. With this morph, consuming cracks refunds 30% of the ability's cost per crack spent, so you can refund 90% of its cost when used at maximum crack stacks. The second morph, Imperious Rune Ward, well, first of all increases the scaling from 30% of your max health to 37%, which oddly isn't specified anywhere in the skill or morph description. And on top of that, the damage shield is stronger during the very first second, during which the scaling is 60% of your max HP. This is extremely strong. I tried it in the new trial and with 43,358 HP, the shield was absorbing absurd amounts of damage. Without any additional modifiers it would absorb 26,872. But Arcanist has the intricate Runeforms passive, which reduces the cost and increases strength of damage shields by 10%, which bumped it up to 29,559. And then, on top of that, I used the Bastion CP, so I ended up with 33,591 damage shield, which is extremely overpowered. So, in my opinion, Imperious Rune Ward is the better morph, especially since Arcanist has absurd sustain passive, so you don't really need the cost refund that Spiteward morph provides. Next we have Fate Woven Armor, which is the 20-second major resolve skill that every class has. Fate Woven Armor's special gimmick is that it applies Minor Breach to attackers for 6 seconds when they hit you. The first morph is Crooksweaver Armor, which increases the duration from 20 seconds to 30, and generates cracks when you get hit, up to once every 5 seconds. The second morph is Unbreakable Fate, which grants you 5% block mitigation and additional 5% per crack spent, so you can get up to 20% block mitigation from it. With this skill, there's no clear winner, as they both can be better in different scenarios. Cracksweaver's increased cracks generation can allow you to heal more with your Runespite Ward and mitigate more damage with Runic Jolt. Not to mention that thanks to your passives, you restore resources whenever you gain cracks. But for fights with lots of blockable damage, Unbreakable Fate will be simply better. Next we have Runic Defense. The skill grants minor resolve for 20 seconds to you and your allies within 10 meters. It also grants you minor protection. When you're damaged below 50% HP, the minor protection will get consumed to heal you for 30% of your max HP. Minor resolve is great and will reduce the damage your allies take by around 6 to 7%, but it has other sources, such as combat prayer, or resolving vigor if you're only concerned about buffing yourself. As for minor protection, I would advise to keep using Temporal Guard, as the minor protection from running defense will disappear when you go below 50% HP. The first morph is Rune Guard of Still Waters, which immobilizes enemies within 7 meters for 2 seconds after a 1 second delay. The second morph is Rune Guard of Freedom, which grants you 3000 armor and CC immunity for 6 seconds when the heal is procced. This CC immunity can only occur once every 30 seconds. In my opinion, you can't balance the armor in your build around the armor you get from the skill, as it will be too inconsistent. There is no clearly better morph, as they both can be better than the other in specific scenarios. For example, Rune Guard of Still Waters will be better in dungeons, where a snare can be useful in trash, while the Rune Guard of Freedom can be useful against bosses that can stun you. Next, Rune of Eldritch Horror. After 1 second, apply an 8-second stun and 10-second minor vulnerability to enemy. The stun is irrelevant, as you won't be casting it on small mobs that actually can be stunned, you'll be casting it on bosses. First morph is Rune of Uncanny Adoration, which charms the target instead of stunning it, which is useless to us from a PvE perspective. Second morph is Rune of the Colorless Pool, which also applies Minor Brittle and increases the duration from 10 seconds to 20 seconds. This is actually huge because so far Minor Brittle could only be procced by proccing Chilled status effect while wielding an ice staff. This skill makes keeping up Minor Brittle much easier. Now, the ultimate, Gibbering Shield. An ultimate that costs 180 ultimate points. You gain a shield equal to 192% of your max health for 10 seconds, that absorbs 60% of all damage. When the shield collapses, you lash out, dealing all of the damage you've absorbed around you within 5 meters, as magic damage over 10 seconds. First morph, Sanctum of the Abyssal Sea. It increases the scaling of the shield from 192% of your max health to 228%. Second morph, Gibbering Shelter, also increases the scaling, but only from 192% to 198% of max health. This morph no longer deals damage, but now when the shield takes damage, you grant damage shields to up to 6 allies within 15 meters for 4 seconds, which absorb amount equal to 33% of your max health. These shields can be applied once every second. I think Gibbering Shelter is the better morph, as the survivability it provides for your teammates is actually huge. Now let's take a quick look at the passives of Soldier of Apocrypha skill line. Aegis of the Unseen. This passive grants you 2000, well, almost 2000 armor whenever you have a Soldier of Apocrypha ability active, which should easily be at all times. Combined with Runic Sunder, this means that Arcanist has additional 4200 unique armor, which makes it much easier to reach the armor cap, to the point where you might be going over the armor cap, in which case it would allow you to, for example, unslot Fortified CP and slot something else. Wellspring of the Abyss. You gain 129 stamina, magicka and health recovery for each Soldier of Apocrypha ability slotted. With the setup I was using in Insanity's Edge, I was gaining 387 on my front bar and 258 on my back bar. This, combined with Erudition passive, grants you Absurd Sustain. When fully buffed, I was at 2407 magicka recovery and 2271 stamina recovery. Circumvented Fate. Grants your group members minor evasion, which decreases damage taken from area attacks by 10%. This is great because the only 2 other sources of minor evasion in the game are Warden's Deceptive Predator skill and Abyssal Brace 5-piece set. This will be extremely useful for some fights, like for example Tideborn Talaria or Lord Falgraven. Implacable Outcome. Grants 4 ultimate when you consume cracks, and it can occur once every 8 seconds. Now moving on to the healer skill tree, Curative Runeforms. Here I'm not going to describe all abilities. I'm only gonna talk about abilities that can be, in my opinion, useful for a tank. Chakram Shield. Grants damage shield equal to 25% of your max resource to up to 4 allies for 6 seconds. First morph, Chakram of Destiny, causes the ability to generate cracks, and recasting it on the same target will increase the shield's strength by 30%. Second morph, Tidal Chakram, causes the ability to consume cracks, to reduce the cost by 20% per crack spent. Chakram of Destiny is the better morph here. You want to spend your cracks on Runespite Ward or Unbreakable Fate rather than this. Not to mention that holding onto cracks reduces your damage taken thanks to Runic Jolt. Arcanist's Domain. Create an 8-meter area that grants you and your allies Minor Courage, which grants 215 weapon and spell damage, and Minor Fortitude, Intellect and Endurance, which increase your health, magicka and stamina recoveries by 15%. Minor Intellect and Endurance have lots of other viable sources, such as Regenerative Ward, Enchanted Growth, Radiant Aura or Refreshing Path, but gaining Minor Courage from a skill is a big deal, as the only other sources of it that apply to 12 people are Yolnacrin and Crusader, which means that by running this skill you'll free up a 5-piece item slot on a support player. The first morph, Xena's Empowering Disc, makes it so the buffs persist for 10 seconds after leaving the circle. The other morph, Reconstructive Domain, heals you and allies inside the area for 1.8% of your higher resource, plus 90% of your weapon or spell damage every 2 seconds. The first morph, Xena's Empowering Disc, is the better morph in my opinion, since the area isn't that big, so forcing your DDs to stay inside of it at all times could be problematic. It's much easier to keep up these buffs when they persist for 10 seconds after leaving the area, and also the healing from Reconstructive Domain is extremely small. Next ability, Apocryphal Gate. Create a portal in front of you that you can repeatedly use to travel between 2 points. Each time you travel through it, you generate cracks. I can see the potential on this skill, I can see it being useful for example for teleporting over Cone on Bassay, but I can't really say if it will work there because I haven't tested it yet. I need more time to definitely say if this ability is worth it. The first morph is Fleet-Footed Gate, which grants you Major Expedition for 4 seconds after going through the portal. The second morph is Passage Between Worlds, which allows your teammates to use a synergy to travel through the portal. Now the ultimate, Vitalizing Glyphic. An ultimate skill that costs 200 ultimate points. You summon an Apocrypha Glyphic for 15 seconds that pulses every second and grows stronger the more you heal it. It grants your allies up to 200 weapon and spell damage based on its health, and heals them for up to 4% of your higher resource plus 42% of your weapon or spell damage every second. It's a very interesting ultimate. It's not stronger than Horn, it's actually quite a bit weaker and shorter, but it provides healing instead. I think it's too early to say anything for sure, but I wonder if optimized groups will be able to keep up Horn and this ultimate at the same time. Now let's look at the morphs. First one is Glyphic of the Tides. The only thing that changes with this morph is that it starts at higher health, 53% instead of 30%. The other morph, Resonating Glyphic, changes the glyph to grow in strength the more you damage it, rather than the more you heal it, and it now starts at 70% HP. Now let's take a quick look at the passives of the Curative Runeforms skill line. Healing Tides. Increases your healing down by 3% for each cracks active. A nice bonus. Hideous Clarity. Whenever you generate cracks, you restore 225 magicka or stamina, whichever is higher. It's the passive I mentioned before when talking about Crooksweaver armor. Erudition. Increases your magicka and stamina recovery by 18%. It's extremely strong and synergizes well with Wellspring of the Abyss passive. Intricate Runeforms. Reduces the cost and increases the strength of your damage shields by 10% while you have a Curative Runeforms ability slotted. It's a great boost for your Impervious Rune Ward, which is why you should have a Curative Runeforms ability on your front bar. Personally, I used Xena's Empowering Disc. And now the last skill tree, the DPS one, Herald of the Tome. Once again, I'm not going to describe all abilities, I'm only going to talk about the ones that can be in my opinion useful for a tank. First we have Abyssal Impact. You deal damage to enemies in front of you, immobilize them for 3 seconds and drench them in ink for 20 seconds, which increases the damage they take from you by 5%. I feel like this ability can be useful for a tank because of the immobilization. First morph is the Cephaliarch's Flail, which causes it to generate cracks and deals more damage to enemies who are at low HP. The second morph is Tentacular Dread, which converts it to magicka ability, changes the damage type to Frost, and causes it to consume cracks to strengthen the ink and duration of the immobilization by 1 second per crack spent. In my opinion, if you're going to use that, you should go for Cephaliarch's Flail, as you don't really want to waste cracks on it. Next up we have Tomebearer's Inspiration. You augment your weapons for 30 seconds. Once every 5 seconds when you damage an enemy with your class abilities, you deal additional damage and generate cracks if you have none. It also grants Major Brutality and Sorcery while slotted on either bar. This skill can be useful for generating additional cracks if you're spending it fast, but I haven't tested it in combat, as I simply couldn't fit it in with all the other useful Arcanist abilities. The first morph, Inspired Scholarship, increases the frequency of the damage. It can happen once every 3 seconds, rather than once every 5 seconds. The other morph, Recuperative Treatise, restores 600 magicka and stamina whenever you proc the damage. Next we have the Imperfect Ring. This ability spawns an AoE under your target that applies a dot to the target and all enemies around it. An ally near the initial target can activate the Runebreak synergy, that deals damage equal to 12% of their maximum resource plus 126% of their weapon or spell damage, to all enemies within 7 meters. The first morph is Rune of Displacement, which places a rune under the target which pulls in enemies within 8 meters after 2 seconds. Or at least it should. I don't know if the pull is supposed to be this weak or if it's bugged, but it's definitely not worth it in its current state. The second morph is Fulminating Rune, which causes another explosion after 6 seconds and allows up to 3 allies to use the Runebreak synergy. This can be extremely strong, as the synergy deals damage that's around 20% higher than the damage of an average spammable. So if the synergies are being used by DDs, this skill will provide a lot of damage per cast, not to mention the sustain it will provide, thanks to the Undaunted Command passive or Harmony Jewelry trait. Now let's take a quick look at the passives of Herald the Tome skill line. Fated Fortune. You gain 12% critical damage and critical healing for 7 seconds whenever you gain or spend cracks. Harnessed Quintessence. Whenever you are restored magic or stamina, you gain 5% weapon and spell damage for 10 seconds. Psychic Lesion. While having Herald of the Tome ability slotted, your attacks apply a debuff that increases enemies' damage taken from status effects by 15%. Splintered Secrets. Grants 999 penetration per Herald of the Tome ability slotted. And that's all of the skills and passives that I think can be useful for an Arcanist tank. Now I'm gonna sum up my opinion, but I'll keep it short since I haven't tested it all enough yet. Arcanist tanks seem extremely strong. They have more unique armor buffs than any other class. They get unique damage mitigation from Runic Jolt. They get access to unique melee tone that has longer range than Pierce armor. They provide unique 2000 penetration. They get access to an extremely strong damage shield, a Runespite ward, which also gets buffed by intricate Runeforms passive. Their sustain is extremely good thanks to passives like Hideous Clarity, Erudition and Wellspring of the Abyss. And they can get up to 20% block mitigation buff that lasts 20 seconds. There's also stuff like access to Minor Courage, Minor Evasion, Easier Minor Brittle, access to Apocryphal Gate or the Glyphic Ultimate, but these can also be provided by, for example, an Arcanist healer. One aspect where they are lacking are self-heals. You can heal yourself for 30% of your max HP with Runic Defense, but this heal procs only when you fall below 50% HP. You can also heal yourself with Runespite Ward, but it's just 10% of max health per crack spent. You could also heal yourself with Runic Embrace for 10% of your max health, but then you'd be giving up the armor and penetration from Runic Sunder. A lot of people will probably be curious if Arcanists will replace Dragon Knights or Necromancers, which are currently the two best classes to bring into difficult trials. I don't think Arcanist can beat Necromancer at dealing with dots, though I might be wrong. However, it does seem like Arcanists are straight up a better version of DK tank. DK gets 10% unique block mitigation, Arcanist gets 20%. DK gets 1650 unique armor, Arcanist gets 4200. DK has Igneous Shield and Hardened armor, Arcanist has Impervious Rune Ward. On top of that, DK's unique debuffs like Stone Giant or Engulfing Flames can also be applied by a damage dealer DK. But Arcanist's unique penetration debuff gets applied by the Taunt ability, so it has to be run by a tank. So yeah, from my first impression it looks like Arcanist will be just a better DK. Of course DK still has some unique stuff like access to Magicka Chains, 50% damage reduction against projectiles, AoE interrupt, group-wide major brutality and sorcery, and an ultimate that makes you immortal. And most importantly, DK has actually good self-heals, which already makes it better than Arcanist in the new trial, since the first boss has a dot that deals Oblivion damage, so it straight up goes through your damage shields, which makes Arcanist extremely bad for this fight. And that's it for this video. Let me know what your thoughts are about Arcanist. See you in the next video.